Thank you, George. It's good to be with you, folks. This is a great venue for just initiating discussion and getting a little bit of information, a few resources, and helping you out as heads of school. And what I love the most about this, it's about the head board chair relationship, which I think it drives our schools in so many ways. And probably in the foremost way is about how we model for our faculty and parents and ultimately for our kids. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sharing my screen with you, and we'll be off and running. Can you all see this?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
All right, so that's what we're doing. And what I want to do first, very quickly, is to, come on. I want to start off a little bit to just get to know you just very quickly, your school and how long have you been ahead and how long have you worked with your current board chair and how large is your board and what percent of your board roughly are current parents. So George, I'll leave it up to you to, actually I can come back here. Oh no, I thought I'd get a bigger view. So who would like to start out? All right, Pam, you're the first one. You're on mute.
Unmute, hold on, sure, I'll start.
There you go.
My board is 13. 2 of them are current parents. The board chair is in her 2nd year, having been precipitously nominated on a Sunday afternoon 2 springs ago.
Thank you. And what, you know what percent are current parents, roughly?
2 out of 13.
Okay, thank you. Next.
I've been ahead for 27 years, but 3 of them here.
George, I'm going to let you pick and choose because I only have 4 profiles on my screen.
Right. I think if folks just unmute their microphones and answer the question, that'd probably be the smoothest.
It's Brenda. I have 16 board members. One of them is an alum parent. No, 2 actually. One's child just graduated. So there's 2 who are alum parents and the rest are current parents. I've been at Metropolitan, this is my 6th year, and the board chair has been the board chair for 5 of those 6 years, and he was my current board chair.
Hi, I'm Angela Coombs. I am at Academy of St. Joseph. We have 7 board members, of which 2 are parents, and our current board chair, this is her 2nd year, and I've been here for 10 years.
Hi, I'm Loren Denicola. I'm at the Brownstone School. I'm entering my 3rd year as director. We have 11 board members, 10 of which are all parents, alumni. This year we have about 50% that are current parents who will also be returning with siblings. My current co-chair is in her 2nd year.
Thank you.
I'm Matthew Stewart.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's
Go ahead, Patty.
I'm Patty Vitale. I'm from Brown School. I'm in my 7th year. We have a 13-member board of trustees, 3 of which are present parents, 3 are alumni parents.
I'm Matthew Stewart. I've been at Cadman for 5 years. We have 19 board members. The new rule in our bylaws is nothing more than 70% can be current parents, and we set it about that. So there are about 6 non-parent board members and 13 current parents.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Sissel. I'm in Harbor Country Day School in Long Island. And the enrollment here is about 161. It gives you some sense of the board enrollment balance. And we have 15 members on the board. I'm in my third year's head, 50%. And we do have bylaws that state that we have no more than 50% of the board as current parents. One of the 15 is an alum. The chair's been there this is her 4th year.
And that's the full group, Dane.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move along. And what I'm going to do is share with you some slides, some data, some resources. And about every 5th slide, this is going to pop up, the slide you're seeing now, so that to give you a chance to ask questions, comments, and if you have any concerns. Just the fact that the information you just shared about your board chair's tenure and the number of current parents you have on your board can be helpful to all of us and give us all perspective. So that's data that you're sharing in and of itself. But one of the things that I often find that when I'm talking with boards and heads is, what does best practices mean? And who says what's right and what's wrong? Well, I want to share some of those with you in terms of how we develop what's right and what's wrong and how we develop best practices. And essentially, it's coming from research and data. It's coming from resources, related professional organizations and networks, and standards. And there are 2 types of standards, basically, that are overseeing our school. There are internal standards, which are bylaws, policies, procedures, evaluation, and the governance committee. We have those that help regulate our own governance and leadership within the school. And then we have also external standards. And these, the 5 that I'm sharing with you at this point, are legal compliance, accreditations, principles of good practice, professional organizations, and industry resources. And George, just remind me, I'm happy to share a PDF of this, but actually they'll be able to see the whole eSeminar, correct? If they want to, and if they want to share this with their own boards or board chairs.
That's correct. We'll be sharing a recording and also your slides as a PDF afterwards.
Okay, good. So this one, legal compliance, Mark always uses this in his Trusteeship 101, and I love it because it is so basic. The 3 legal responsibilities for nonprofit boards. Essentially, is a duty of care, making sure that you're caring for what you are holding in trust, and then a duty of loyalty, making sure that you are loyal to this institution above all else, and then a duty of obedience, so that when you have bylaws, when policies and procedures come up, you're following them as you should. So that legal compliance, this is very basic. Of course, there's a whole host of others, especially in New York State and New York City, but we don't have time going into those. Down in the lower left-hand corner, I try to cite all of my sources so that if you want to look more into what I'm talking about, you can go to the source directly. Accreditations, these come from Judy Sheridan, which are bullets that she uses when she refers to the NYSAIS accreditation. And essentially, you all know what it is. You've been through your own self-studies. You probably have all chaired visiting committees or served on visiting committees. But these help us a great deal in terms of looking at core values, tradition, and history, what was, but also the vision of what could be and the aspirations. But also, I think one of the most important things about accreditations are the criteria or the standards within the accreditation. One of the things that I found when I was at my school 14 years ago was I came in new. I had been a head for 11 years, so I had the experience of what it was like to be on a nonprofit school board. And I'd go along and try to help the board understand the why and wherefore And, you know, they were nodding their heads. Yeah, that's nice, but you've just gotten on the block. So, you know, how much do you really know? Well, it wasn't until the school went through its NYSAIS accreditation that all of a sudden they perked up and they realized, oh, we should be doing this, even though Dane was telling them that they should be. So accreditation can be most helpful to us in our work. The third external standard is principles of good practice. If you don't have a copy of the NYSAIS principles of good practice, you should get a copy of them and have them handy, and, you know, refer to them often with your board and your faculty, admissions, because there are all kinds of principles of good practice in here. One on hiring, which is really interesting in terms of the practices we follow so that we don't poach from one another. The fourth thing is the professional organizations. Of course, NYSAIS, which we're all members of, and then NAIS, BoardSource. If you don't use BoardSource, you really want to look into it. It's an exceptional organization, and it serves nonprofit boards. So not just school boards, but the resources that you get from them are incredible. And then ISM, Independent School Management, which I'm sure you all know of, I find to be very helpful too, especially with the data that it collects. And then the National Board of Business Officers Association. So National Business Officers Association, which is very helpful to your business officers or chief financial officers. Industry resources. So our industry, in terms of running nonprofit schools, the research, data, the resources, the related professional organizations and networks, and their standards. And the little pamphlet on the right it comes from NAIS, and it was a study that was done in May of 2015. And it's independent school leadership, heads, boards, and strategic thinking. You've got to get a copy of this. And I'm going to make reference to some of the items throughout. But let's look at some of the data that you would find in this pamphlet. And we're talking about independent schools that are members of NYSAIS that partook in this. So does your board set annual goals for the head of school? Out of the schools that were polled, you can see that probably almost 75% do follow this, maybe a little bit more. And there's a portion, a good chunk of the pie that don't. The other one is what role does your head of school play on the board? And I find it interesting to see which ones are voting members. The blue right there, the 138 member schools. Most of the schools, the head is the ex officio, 3/4 is ex officio. And then those that are not members of the board at all, you see the 77, which is a smaller portion of the pie, but they do exist. Here's a chock full. This one you could sit and look at for 15 minutes, but essentially what it is looking at is, if you see the blue is the engage in professional development. How often does, like what we're doing right now, or sharing an eSeminar at a board meeting, engage in professional development. And you can see that once a year gets most of the play, but nevertheless, there are some that do it more than once a year. And then the maroon is hold executive sessions. You can see that that's done more than once a year. And then evaluate its performance. The board's performance once a year is pretty typical, and evaluate the head of school's performance, and that's the purple. So sometimes if you can just share these with your board, it's not that it's the head saying, hey, you need to do this. This is what the standards say and what best practices, where they come from. At this point, George, I'll let you take over. All right, does anyone have any questions or comments or concerns?
Dane, if you can be both ex officio and a voting member, when that question was asked, did they separate?
Yes. Yeah, ex officio means that you are sitting on that board by virtue of your position. But if the bylaws so state, you know, that you can be ex officio, you're there by virtue of your position. But also, if it says you have a vote, whether it's the board or committees, yes.
So the 77 who do have a vote are also ex officio. You just made ex officio non-voting.
It depends. You have to look at each person, each school's bylaws to see what it says, because the bylaws might also say they're there because, I don't know, they taught at the school for 7 years and they've risen to the position of faculty chair. And so all of a sudden they are designated as the board, the head of school, or the chief executive officer, or the executive director of the school. Again, you've got to go to the individual bylaws.
Is there any best practice for whether you should be voting or not voting? Member?
Well,
if you're ahead?
Well, that's a good question, Brenda. When I got to Brooklyn Heights Montessori, I was not a trustee of the board. And I wanted to find out how many of my Brooklyn colleagues, of the 10 Brooklyn colleagues, were on the board, were members of the board, and which ones had a vote. And I just wanted to get some perspective. And essentially all of them, all 10, were members of the board, but 2, if I remember correctly, 2 could vote. And the voting aspect, it can be a conflict of interest in terms of when you are voting as a staff member, if you will. And to avoid that, you know, the bylaws would just say that you do not have the right to vote. But that is the preponderance of our schools. The head does not have the right to vote, but some do.
My question was about the data. That piece that says ex officio, those people do not vote. And the blue piece of 77 are the people who do vote, right?
Well, there could be an overlap. I don't know. I would have to read the data more closely, but it's a fair question, Pam.
I have one question about board setting goals. I provided my goals for the year for them, and they added to it. I didn't expect that they would say, John, you need to do this, and they would establish the full agenda for the year. Is that right?
Let me speak to that, John. What I like to see in the schools that I've been to is generally you have your strategic plan. All schools should have it, and it's a criteria that you go through that process periodically. But what happens is the strategic plan goals and objectives will drive what the head's goals and objectives should be for a particular year. So as you formulate your annual board agenda, the board and the head sit down and say, okay, what do we need to accomplish this year based on the strategic plan? And then when you agree upon that, what is doable, what might not be doable, then the board comes up with the head these goals and objectives. The head, and you generally start with, ideally you start with your partner, the board chair. And then it's shared with the executive committee, and you get some input there. So by the time you get to the full board, sharing with the full board, it's not you presenting it, John. It's not your board chair presenting it, but it's the executive committee, of which the head and the board chair obviously are part of. And let me just throw this out, that the goals and objectives, the annual goals and objectives of the head, you know, they shouldn't be more than 2 pages long. They've got to be doable and not overwhelming. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, we'll move on to the next segment, and that it's team building. One of the things that I love about this study that was done by NAIS is it looked at 5 elements that were consistently present and paramount to strategic effectiveness of boards and to a set of institutional outcomes for independent schools in our study. and forgive me if you've been through all of this and you've seen this document, but it doesn't hurt to go through it again. I've been through it many times. And these are the 5 elements. The purposeful use of committees is associated with increased strategic effectiveness. You'd be amazed at the number of boards who just don't incorporate committees. Whether it's a governance committee, a finance committee, an executive committee, it just isn't happening. So if your board is doing that and you have strategic use of committees, that's wonderful. The second piece is strategically effective boards are intentional about onboarding new trustees, having a new trustee orientation session for the new trustees, an agenda, a pamphlet, a board manual, which you should all have. And you might also have a trustee mentor program. So you assign an existing trustee, an experienced trustee with a new trustee coming on board. This onboarding is so important, and I see it not only in this study, but Board Source talks about it a great deal, and so does ISM. The third element is the relationship between the board chair and the head of school is critical. It's the third element in the 5 elements. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. This is why I asked the question previously up front, is the percentage of trustees who are current parents have minimal direct, can you hear me okay? Okay. The percentage of trustees who are current parents has minimal direct influence on strategic effectiveness within boards of trustees. So often we say we can't have too many current parents because, we're going to be co-opted because those current parents don't know how to distinguish when they are trustees and when they are parents and when they are advocates for their children. Well, that's why we have conflict of interest policies, and a strong board chair and a strong executive committee at head of school is constantly reminding, and that's why the onboarding is so important, how to distinguish your responsibilities, that the school that you hold in your trust has to come first. And then the last one is that boards that rate highly on strategic effectiveness contribute positively to institutional performance. Boards that have strategic effectiveness. So it's not only in putting in a strategic plan, but also being strategic, as Dr. Richard Chait talks about. One of his modes, board modes or types of boards, is the first one is fiduciary, the second one is being strategic in the strategic mode, and the third one is to be generative. So this study is bearing that out. I always like to refer to probably one of my all-time favorite books on leadership and governance, and that is Danny Meyer, who's right there in New York City and is probably the biggest restaurateur in New York City. He has Shake Shack, he has, which is about to reopen again, is Union Square Cafe, he has the concession for MoMA and some other pretty high-end restaurants. But the thing that I love about this book, and by the way, about 8 years ago, it was handed to me by one of my trustees, was you set the table by first taking care of your employees. Because if you take care of your employees, they can take care of the families. And then ultimately, everybody is going to take care of the students, is what you're trying to get at. Another book that I just read, and as a matter of fact, if you follow my blog, it will be posted tomorrow on my blog. This was a book that was given to me by the author, John Gordon, and it's called The Energy Bus. And I like to think of how the heads serve the table after it's been set. So advice from a company CEO or the chief energy officer is when you feel good, others around you feel good. Well, when you are enthusiastic, you feel real good, and this makes the people around you feel real good. The simple truth is that when you are excited, people get excited about where your bus is going, and this makes them want to get on and stay on your bus. One of a survey that was started back in 1991 and done every 10 years by NAIS was the 14 responsibilities of a head. We won't have time to go into it now, but the most important responsibility of a head of school, according to this survey that was done and the study that was done by NAIS, it wasn't about taking care of your trustees. It wasn't about fundraising. It wasn't about teaching or strategic planning or hiring and firing. It was about the school climate. And this just reinforces that in terms of how we present ourselves as heads in our school. He also said, the book also talks about the energy of a company or a team is cultivated by the energy and enthusiasm of the leaders and each person in the organization who contributes to the collective energy. This, I put this in because the board chair, your partner, and the team is so critical, because if the board chair is positive about the school, then all of those board members fall in line or pick up on it. It's infectious. And then when the board chair and the head have that relationship that goes out and it is presented to the community, everybody just wants to do what they can for the school, and ultimately that helps the students. The Inner Life of School Leaders, lower left corner, is a really good article by, it's in Independent School Magazine, in the latest issue of Independent School Magazine. If you get a chance, read it. It is very germane to what I'm talking about. That team building becomes so, so important. I'll stop now, and George, if you'll take over and see if there are any questions, comments, or concerns.
I think, Dane, the easiest thing for you to do would be to stop sharing your screen so that we can see all the participants and they'll know whether it's their turn to raise a hand or unmute their mic.
Got it. Okay.
The top.
Yeah, got it. There we go. Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
And a reminder, you can unmute yourself in the bottom left-hand corner.
And Dane, do you want to express your prompt again? Was there a specific question that you wanted to get some input on?
On the slides that I just presented and the data that I just presented, any questions, any concerns? Okay. Happy to move on. Brenda?
Brenda, you're still on mute.
Actually, I have a question. I have a good and very positive relationship with the board chair, but I'm thinking about how do I actually get the board chair and the full board to be more engaged on a regular basis with both the teachers and the parents in a positive way. I think now half the people don't even know who they are or what they do. I'm working to get them more engaged, kind of requiring them as part of their trustee duty to attend a certain number of events a year. But I wonder if others of you have similar experiences with your trustees, or are they, I mean, they're at the things that involve their kids because it's mostly current parents, but are they positively thinking about how to reach out to others that they don't know to get them feeling good about the school climate, not just my relationship?
I would, Brenda, I would say we ask very seriously, and I send reminders, and for the most part, they're good about showing up at a couple of activities, like we have the parent cocktail parties, and the big thing I always debate is introducing them, and kind of, I'm sensitive to the idea of, we're at this wonderful event for the 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade parents, and do I pick out which of their fellow parents are board members? Because I want to say thank you and congratulate them, but I don't want to reinforce some type of hierarchy, and they have an access to the head that you don't have. So that's always my inner war.
Yeah. No, I get that. Yeah.
But I don't know if this is what you're asking about, but there are two things I've done. One is this past year started the board orientation, where they come to school and meet with certain leaders of the school, and then they spend time visiting classes, and that's done a lot to build trust between teachers and board members, and they love the board members love to do that. And then anytime I've done a series of receptions at my house to talk about where the school's going, and it's not just with parents but administrators. I always have one board member there representing that group, and they love doing that too, and the parents love having them there. If that's what you're asking about.
That's interesting, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a technique that you can use is that, say, pick 3 board meetings out of the course of the year or more, and devote the first 10 minutes of the board meeting to having a division head come and just talk about his or her division. And it's a way for the board to get acquainted with that particular individual and a particular division through that individual. So often, Brenda, I like hearing what you're saying, because so often heads are overwhelmed by board members who go beyond the operational. They don't have that operational responsibility. It's the governance responsibility, and they start stepping in, whether it's a current parent or not.
Right.
And so that's a good thing that you're facing. Yet at the same time, you do want them. And let me just say to you that the governance committee can be charged with getting that interaction and the appropriateness, because the head sits on the governance, should sit on the governance committee, and you can strategize in terms of, okay, how can we solve this problem?
No, I hadn't really used that committee as effectively, I think, as I should. I tend to use the executive committee that way, or the head support committee. But I think you're right. It really is the trustee committee, because they set the tone for the board as to what their responsibilities are, rather than the leadership being the only ones. I think that people look at the trustee committee as more open to them as a trustee.
You. That's a good point. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to continue.
Can I just ask a question, Dane?
Go ahead, Angela.
Being new to all of this and having relatively a small board, what would your recommendation be in terms of, as we're building that board, would you suggest, like, first of all, who chooses the board members? Is it the board, or does the head of school typically, like, up to this point, I have been typically suggesting people, but maybe you could give me some direction with regard to that. Also, in terms of trustee mentorship, since essentially all of my board is relatively new to this, for them to be mentoring one another might not be the best. And I'm saying that with kindness.
Yes, but
if you could help with that.
Situation. The first part of your question is, that's where you have to form, or the board needs to form, that governance committee or committee on trustees. The old-fashioned name was called nominating committee. Okay. But the governance committee really has 4 different tasks. And the very first one that this committee is responsible for is the recruitment and nomination of new members. The board has to take ownership of the people that they bring on board. It's not the head of school. And yes, as you get started in terms of where you're at, you're helping that along more than normal. But ideally, the head sits in the background. Now, the head has a say on the governance committee and might recommend a couple people. And one of the things that you want to do is you set up little farm teams, if you will, like in baseball, where you have a development committee that's going to sponsor a gala. And you find that you've got 1 or 2 people that are just going all out, and you're watching them. Those are the kind of people that you want to make the governance committee aware of, to say, we probably want to bring him or her on the board because they're such hard workers and they're invested in the school. Another thing that the governance committee, they're the ones responsible for the annual evaluation of the board. Another thing is that they're responsible for the professional development of the board. And then the other thing that they're responsible for is the succession planning for your leaders. And it's not just the officers, but it's also the committee chairs. So, and then we're talking about a 2 to 3 year process here, Angela. It just doesn't happen overnight.
Okay.
But once the board takes ownership of that, you're golden. You really are, because then you sit back and you're the facilitator as opposed to the leader where you don't want to be that.
Right.
But understandably so, you're in that position.
Thank you.
Could I add something in here, if you don't mind?
Sure.
This is a really critical function of the board as well as the head of school. And it's very important in my estimation that the head of school pay a lot of attention to this area. Because the types of trustees that you bring onto the board, skill sets, as well as their ability to work with other trustees is such a critical function that you want to make sure that it's done right.
Yes.
When it's done right, it's great. And if you miss something, and it can happen sometimes, it can cause disruptions on boards.
And I would say, thank you, Mark. I would say go one step further. The governance committee would set up a profile of the board. So it would profile the board that it has, and it looks for any slots that are missing, be it legal expertise, be it financial planning expertise. And you want to be very deliberate in the people you're looking for. And this is where the board head and head of school can form that partnership and deliberate back and forth, so that when the two of you and the board chair should sit on the governance committee, go there, it gets people excited because now it's two people and it's not just one people, but it is probably the most important job that a board has. Okay, I'm gonna just move on a little bit. I'm gonna share my screen again. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So, of those 5 elements that I talked about earlier from the study, NEIS study, that relationship between the board chair and head of school is critical. I like to refer to the ISM, Independent School Management Stability Markers. So these markers, if you're not familiar with them, these 6 markers are that if you are a stable school, you're probably looking at each of these 6 markers. 1, that you have a cash reserve, debt, endowment mix, a good mix. 2, the strategic plan and strategic financial plan, you have one. A stable board has strong executive leadership. Number 4, it's hard income driven, so that tuition is, you're depending upon the tuition, not depending upon the fundraisers, and that's more of the soft income, or your aftercare program. Those are the things that help a school be stable. And number 5 is a profiled board, referring back to what I was mentioning, picking up on Mark's comment, is that you want to, every year you want to profile your board, and then you let the board know what you need on your board to be stronger and to help your school be more stable. And number 6 is board leadership, strong board leadership. So there it is as stability markers. I wanted to share with you, because I thought it was really fascinating. I was on the NAS website a couple months ago, and this is the leadership through partnership. If you have not done that, often, I've done it several times as a participant, and I've gone with my board chair. I went with my board chair. And these are some of the things that they talk about. Very good. You go down to Atlanta, I believe that's where it is now, and you go for like a weekend, and you're just inundated with all this good stuff. Leadership through partnership program. And you can see the strengthening of the overall board head working relationship is number 1, as far as I'm concerned. Here's a book that I'll bet you not many of you have heard about, and it's called Doing Good Better by Edgar Stotz. I picked it up. Just someone had recommended it to me, and I just fell in love with this book. It's like the trustee handbook put out by NAIS, but it's just a lot more simple, a lot more basic. And I bring it up because often if you hand the trustee handbook to your trustee, often it doesn't get read. It's a good reference, but it just gets put on the shelf. Whereas this book, I find, is more agreeable to getting people to pick up and diving in. And I thought this was an interesting thing that he talks about where the term the chair comes from. You probably know this, but as you can read, it dates back to a time when the only chair in the room was for the presiding officer. And since that person was always, until recently, a male, he was called the chairman. I can remember that. Mark, I'm sure you can remember that. And now that things have changed, it's chairperson or just chair, since the position may be filled by a female. Attributes of an outstanding nonprofit board chair. And this comes from Board Source. Give you a chance just to look at those. Notice number 2, that enthusiasm or energy. Here you're seeing it again. Love that number 5, relationship magician. I consulted with a board a little while back, and someone raised his hand and said, "What's a Rolodex?" And nevertheless, and there again, that mutual respect between the CEO / executive director with the board chair. Here is, this is very recent. It was just last week. And let me get rid of this guy over here. Oh, okay, got it. Excellent. And I commend it to all of you to go and read about the 10 problems many board members encounter. This is by Ann Klotz and Scott Looney. Oh, I'm going to get back onto here. And I'm going to just throw 3 of them out. So these are heads speaking, handling 10 common governance snafus. Number 4, a board member lobbies the director of admissions hard on behalf of a child who is neither an academic nor a social fit for the school. Now, I know this has never happened to you, but I'm just bringing it up. Number 6, several parents approach board members at a party to express their concern that the lower school is admitting all kinds of children. Here's number 8, a member of the board who's eager to be of service to the school, spending too much time in the offices of the various senior administrators. While this trustee is a really great ally to the school, she is proving to be a huge time suck for the leadership team. So I would just commend you to all read this. It's easy enough, you know, and this bulletin, this nice NAIS bulletin is free whether you are a member or not. So try to take advantage of that.
Jane, can I add something in here also with these?
Sure.
For all of you, these also make really good questions for your governance committee as you're talking to new potential board members as scenarios to talk about, and using these as getting their thoughts, and that'll help you get a good sense for who's wanting to become a board member and how they might deal with situations like this.
Excellent. Yes. And I would also say in the current Independent School Magazine, the fall 2016, you'll see why I am so passionate about governance committees, is that there's an article that I wrote about the importance of governance committees in the recent Independent School Magazine. But this next piece coming from the Head Speak, Handling 10 Common Snafus, is so important to what we're talking about. The best chair and head relationships are built upon a foundation of true communication. Oh, wait a minute. Trust communication. I can't see it because trust, communication, and mutual respect. With such a strong foundation, solutions can typically be found to even the most challenging governance dilemmas. Patrick Lencioni is probably my
Can I
favorite.
just say one thing about that last quote?
Sure.
You know, I think it really applies to all of the trustees, not just the chair. I think certainly it's most important, but I think if you don't have trust and mutual respect from all of your trustees, you're never going to solve problems, because you have to trust each other that you're all in this for the best reason, because there will be times when people say things that don't feel like they're trustful or that they're respectful, but they really are coming from a good place. And I think it's important to remember that.
Fair point. Thank you, Brenda. And then probably one of my all-time favorite authors is a guy by the name of Patrick Lencioni. He is prolific. And you may have, probably his most famous book is 5 Dysfunctions of an Administrative Team. He also has written Death by Meeting. But his most recent one, it's just out, it's called The Ideal Team Player. And he talks about 3 characteristics of an ideal team player. One is that the individual, you're looking for a humble person, a hungry person, and a smart person. That's that ideal team player. And while you don't necessarily get to choose your team player as the board chair, the board chair generally has a good voice in selecting who the next head is going to be. But think of these 3 characteristics, humble, hungry, and smart, when you're looking for your next business officer or an administrator. So let me stop here and see if there are any questions.
Or comments or thoughts.
Dane, I have a process question. In the recording of this, are our comments all recorded as well?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Good question, Pam.
Can you further explain what you mean by cash reserves, debt, and endowments mix?
Yes, that you might have, you throw off a surplus every year and the cash flow is good, but you're carrying a $17 million bond debt that you're paying an extraordinary amount of money on annually. That's not a good idea, and you have little or no reserves. You want to make sure that the mixture is right, so that while you have those years, those good years where you can throw off a surplus, you want to be able to have a percentage of your reserves, and maybe some of that will come from your endowment, to fill in the gaps when you have a deficit year. Hope that helps.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, I'll go, and I think I have just enough time for one more segment. I have probably, I think, 3 more segments, but I'd much rather have more than not enough. But it plays out to what you were talking about, Brenda. And it talks more about the understanding the partnership. So parents, families, teachers, staff, trustees, and volunteers are those people. And this is playing out more and more in our schools, in our boards, because now we're dealing with basically 4 generations, as opposed to when the baby boomers were in charge, if you will, or more in charge. Back when we were students, the baby boomers, basically you were looking at 3 generations. And you can see now that the millennials are playing much more of a role. It's just obvious. So you just want to make sure that, and I would I'm going to ask you, what generation do you identify with? And this might help you to see what category you're in. I am not the one on the far right, Just want you to know, just because I'm retired. Look at this statistic. This was an earlier NYSAIS bulletin. That just blew my mind. 10,000 baby boomers will retire every year, every day, through the year 2030. And that's coming from Pew Research studies. That's phenomenal. But here's an even bigger question. Which generation has the largest population?
And the millennials, they're taking over. According to the folks at Pew, based on population estimates, there are now 75.4 million millennials in the U.S. versus 74.9 million baby boomers, meaning millennials, not boomers, are now the largest generation in our country.
So it's important to point out that there are 4 anomalies at work with the board-head relationship. 1, the board, the owners, hire, fire, and is responsible for the care of its employees. And oddly enough, it's the head who ultimately provides the guidance and care of the board, the group of volunteers who give up their precious time to hold the school in trust. Number 2, another anomaly, because these volunteers have other responsibilities, family, sometimes children and aging parents, their personal needs and financial obligations, the last thing on their mind is to care for someone who is the leader of the school, one who holds distinction and admirable status. But heads are no different. Their needs are similar. They have families to care for, personal and professional needs, and financial obligations. A third anomaly is heads are charged with devoting huge amounts of professional time caring for others, students, teachers, parents, and they often find themselves guilt-ridden for not dedicating the same amounts of time to their own children and families. And then the last anomaly I point out is that contracts between the head and school need to protect both parties, which is a perplexing way to do business. The owners, the trustees, are the fiduciaries for the school, and at the same time, so is the head. And a word on this from the former head and longtime, now retired executive director of New York State Association of Independent Schools, Fred Calder. He said in his books, obviously, massive contracts do not doom the headship, but in not so subtle ways, they are monuments to distrust. Unless a school and head will have it no other way, simplest is probably the best.